Welcome to this episode of the Jim and Shelby Show, All Things Print Podcast. I'm Jim Raffle, joined as always by...
Shelby Sapusik. How are you today, Jim?
I'm great. Why don't you introduce our special guest?
We do have a special guest today. We have Julia van der Sommen, and she's from Pattern Room, all the way from Melbourne, Australia. How are you today, Julia?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me on this podcast.
If you followed us when we were doing the Die Subcast, in that sense, Julia is a repeat podcast episode because she was with us, our guest, I should say, back when we were in the Die Subcast. But this was a while ago, and I ran into Julia in LA at Mamaki's Digital Textile Factory, and I was catching up with her, and I realized Pattern Room has some exciting things that are new since we last spoke. But first, Julia, could you tell us a little bit about Pattern Room since not everybody saw that Dice Upcast episode?
Absolutely. Thank you for having me on this podcast. So Pattern Room is a world first online pattern catalog of garment patterns for manufacturing and sublimation printing industries. So we sell the DXF and AI file format of a template for a pattern for you to put your graphics on there to then send through to print to a cut and sew factory to make garments.
Okay.
So the important point for our people, coming to the print to the print part of our podcast is that cut and sew piece. So a lot of your customers, it sounds like, are people using like Mamaki printers. I think you mentioned Epson when we were talking before the show, and they're printing dye sublimation on raw material, running it through probably a calendar press, and then they're going to laser cut it into garment pieces, which they sew together after it's been printed. So they can get nice full coverage garments where there's, the color's bleeding right into the seam, right? And those are a lot of times your patterns, is what you're telling us.
That's correct. Yes, we work very closely with Mamaki and Epson because they see that Pattern Room is a really critical part of their customers finding what they need to expand their business and to reach new customers, or at least to capture customers as they walk through the door.
Okay, that's neat. And you're based in Australia.
Yes, we
So
are.
we're just kind of curious, how much of your business, now I know you do regular pattern making too, and I'm assuming a lot of that probably does come from Australia, but that's an assumption as well. I'm wondering, like at Pattern Room specifically, how much of your business is Australia versus global?
We do have quite a few customers in Australia, of course, because we are local and people know about our other business that we have. But we have a number of customers in the States, but also all over the world. We've got customers in Ireland, South Africa, South America. We have a customer in Alaska that we've working with for quite a long time. He often says to me, when it snows, I sew, which I always think is quite funny.
I love
And
There's
it.
a
so
lot.
exactly. So what has really surprised me through the customers that we've gained is that finding great fitting patterns is a need all over the world. But because of our strong relationships in the US with Mamaki and Epson, we have a lot of referral partners there. So a lot of customers come through those referrals.
Well, and we've run into the Pattern Room team face to face at two or three times at least in the last 2 or 3 years. So you make several trips to the US to support this market, which obviously you must have enough business here to support that. So we're glad you come.
Thank you. No, it's lovely. Always lovely to visit and come and see each other.
Excellent, excellent. So one of the things I remember from our previous conversation is that there are some real benefits to working with Pattern Room versus having a freelancer or a pattern maker create a set of, I guess you'd call them custom or unique patterns. What does that look like to you?
So the traditional process when you need a pattern for a garment, so say a customer walks through your front shop and they come with uniforms or they have a need to move from another printer to yourself, then you would need to go down the pathway of finding a pattern maker, taking those garments to a pattern maker, waiting for them to make a pattern, then testing that pattern, then going back and having that pattern graded into the other sizes before exporting it to a digital file. And this process can sometimes take 3 weeks to 3 months, depending on how busy that pattern maker is, because they're starting from scratch each time. I do this in my other business as well, so I know this process very well. But for a long time, people would say to me, but it's just a t-shirt. Why does it take so long? And I thought, you know what, you're actually right. I've made the same t-shirt numerous times in a year, But if I put the effort in beforehand to perfect that t-shirt, then it could be sold as a product rather than a time-based process. So what this means is we have a catalogue of patterns, and that catalogue has expanded extensively to over 1 million designs now. But those patterns are available in 48 hours. And in the area of a t-shirt, for example, we probably have about 34,000 versions of a t-shirt just for men alone, which is over the different body fits, the different hem shapes, hem length, sleeve length, and neckline, and other accessories like yokes and pockets. It's amazing how quickly that can expand out, which means with the design you've got, it's very likely that we're going to have something very close that you can start with at least, and it may be good enough when you actually create that garment. And 48 hours for a tech pack as well as a digital pattern is a huge game changer.
So you mentioned grading, and then you used the word, so that grading is sizing.
So grading is when we take a base size, like a size large, and then after we've approved that pattern, we make it into the extra large, 2 extra large, 3 extra large, both up and down to create a full size set, which is different than fit. Fit would be a slim fit, a regular fit, a loose, or an oversized fit. And that's often confused for people. I think because most people go up a size if they want a looser fit, but it's not actually as simple as that to get a well-fitted garment.
And fit is a regional preference too sometimes, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, because we sell all over the world, this has become quite a big issue that in your own country, what you see around you is a regular style. But globally, it probably sits more in a different side of the scale. For example, in Australia, we tend to have a regular fit. Like a lot of our surfwear brands would be on that regular fit. In Europe, they tend to go more slim fit. And in the US, you do prefer a loose or an oversized fit. Although I found in the Australian market, we have a real trend for oversized jumpers and tracksuit pants, which I think came from COVID.
We all sat around home and got comfortable. Let's leave it at that. All right, that's interesting. Um, so that's an interesting concept, the whole sizing thing. I know I run into that. Shelby will probably laugh now. I do like clothing. And what was that look?
Nothing. I didn't say anything.
And I like shopping for clothing. And I was recently doing some shopping on it. I believe the company is called Huckberry. It's a men's clothing company. And I saw something I hadn't really seen elsewhere before then. And I have seen it at a couple sites since. So I think it's a recent trend, and it kind of leads into some of the things I think you want to tell us about. But what they do now is when you click on the sizing chart, um, it will say, here are the dimensions of this garment if you measure from like armhole to armhole. If you measure from shoulder to hem. And they'll give you, I don't know, half dozen key places that you can grab your own tape measure, grab one of your favorite garments and start measuring and get an idea. And in one case, I thought I was a large, and it turned out that I was a medium in that particular garment based on their measurements. And so, it changed what I bought, and probably it did one of two things. It either saved me from returning something, or it saved me from owning something that had even a more relaxed fit than I wanted. And so are you seeing that as a trend too?
Yeah, definitely. And I'm seeing it more of a trend that in the media that I consume in the sustainable space and trying to reduce landfill in the world, which is something I'm very passionate about, is they're trying to solve this huge issue that the world over we have of return rate. Because people are returning garments, either they're buying the size they think they want and up and down a size to be able to select which one they want and return the other two. But then, of course, those garments go to landfill rather than going back into the cycle of being sold for hygiene reasons or just for the amount of cost that's involved in returning it. We also have an issue that if there's poor fit, then people are just going to reject that range. They're just not going to go back to that particular store because they didn't like the way something fit. Even though in the back end, it may be Nike has this problem, I believe, where it might be that one section is dealing with more of a slim fit and another sport is dealing more of a relaxed fit, but the customer doesn't know that. And so they're trying to find a way to communicate to the customer that not all garments are the same. Some people, and even within pattern room, people say, well, I just need a t-shirt. And they don't realize how many versions of a t-shirt there are. So in the past, I think people have steered away from putting the garment measurements because there is a miscommunication with people seeing that measurement, then measuring their own body and not realizing there's an element of what we call ease in a pattern. But I think by taking it to the next stage and saying, find a garment that you love and you can compare that. In fact, we have an ebook on our website called Four Steps to the Perfect Pattern from Your Favorite Tee, which does exactly this. Measure your favorite t-shirt, compare it to our size charts, and we will tell you what that compares to in the pattern room library.
It's exactly the same thing. This is a trend, it sounds like, in the industry to try
Yes.
and to try and reduce overconsumption of clothing. Yeah, that's
And the return rate more so than
right.
everything.
Which results in overconsumption and going to the landfill, which is just that's a complete waste of a garment and not good for the environment, obviously. So
Absolutely.
all right. So I think that leads into what's new at Pattern Room, right? Want to show
Absolutely.
us?
So this issue of fit is something that came up a lot for us. We have certain pathways people can take to find the perfect pattern they need based on size charts, but we realize people are busy and it can be confusing if that's not your natural knowledge base. So I wanted to introduce something that made it just a no-brainer, really simple for people to find the pattern they need, because often somebody is bringing a garment to you. And in order for you to try and find a tape measure and measure it and look up a chart was too hard. So I introduced something called the Fit Finder. I'll unblur my background for you. So the Fit Finder is something you can download from our website. You can find it in the top menu. You cut out this particular circle and you lay it on the garment on the ground and take a photo and then send it to me. And I will get back to you in 24 hours with what the recipe is to build that garment on our website. And I can also have a look at some of the nuances of that garment. So I might be able to see what the width of the neckband is, what the hem shape is, or it could be some pattern issues that I can pick up. I might say to you, and I did this recently with a customer, I said, I think this is a slim fit t-shirt, shirt tail hem, mid V neckline, but the armhole seems really big and the sleeve seems really big and the shoulders seem quite wide. Is that what you're experiencing? And he said, yes, that's exactly what we found. So we were able to correct the pattern issue at that time for them to get the pattern that they needed.
I see.
So this is going to be a really a fast track way for you to get the exact pattern that you need and not feel overwhelmed with the choices.
That's really neat. Yeah,
It is neat. Yeah.
it's a time saver for everybody, it sounds like.
It really is. It really is, because that's what we're about. We want people to be able to grasp the opportunities when a customer walks through the door. And the traditional way would be that you'd have to wait 6 weeks sometimes to get the pattern you needed. Whereas if I can get the information to you quickly, you can get the pattern in 24, 48 hours, depending on what day of the week it is. And then we can actually get those products too. You can start moving into sampling straight away and capture those jobs as they come through the door, because as we all know, all over the world, we have to maximize our opportunities at the moment.
Shelby, you want to ask the fun question?
Sure. We mentioned that you are based in Melbourne, Australia. And so, for our listeners who maybe have, and us, I've never been to Australia. I think, Jim, have you been
New
to
Zealand.
Australia? No.
No.
New Zealand, that's correct. What would you say to us about what we should see or do if we came to Australia, whether it's Melbourne or just the country?
Look, Australia is so big. It's a similar width and height to the US, although we tend to have people living around the edges, not so many in the middle. And there is so much to see. So depending on what your personal preference for warm weather or cool weather, of course, the beaches in Sydney are absolutely beautiful. But my suggestion is actually something a little bit different than most people say, and that is to spend some time in Darwin. I lived in Darwin for a year. My dad lived there for about 20 years, so I know the place quite well. And it really is a spectacular place. It's got wide open spaces, it's got waterfalls and rainforests, it's got a lot of Indigenous culture, and it really gives a very different view to Australia. But my biggest tip on going to Darwin is that you go in the months of May, June, July, August, which is what we call the dry season. And so they have beautiful sunny days, amazing markets, beautiful weather. But if you step outside of those months, it can be very humid, the wet season, and can be quite unbearable for people who are not used to it. Actually, it
Is
can be
that
pretty unbearable when you live there.
so is it in the north?
It's in the middle of the north.
Middle of the north.
Mm,
Okay.
I'm going to read up on it now.
yeah,
The middle of
it's
the
a
north,
fun
but
place to be.
on the coast?
On the coast?
That's on the north coast. Okay.
Yes.
Interesting. Darwin. Okay.
Yeah.
I've probably heard of it and just I'm drawing a blank, but I've
I
probably heard
have.
of it. So,
Even people in Australia, very few people go to Darwin.
okay.
When they do, they really enjoy it.
What's the population of it?
It's one of those towns in Australia that the population expands in the dry season because it's when most of the Australia is cold.
Mhm.
I don't know. I mean, it's a thriving town. It's got a parliament there. It's
Okay.
what we call a territory rather than a state in Australia.
Okay.
Okay.
But it's got quite a good main city, I guess.
Hmm.
But I couldn't tell you the population. I'd have to look that one up for you.
I can look it up myself. I have Google.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
It's been a fun episode. And for our regular listeners, we will see you again next time.